For the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. We do this every Saturday and Sunday. We had a wonderful Q&A yesterday, a really fun live stream, and we are doing it yet again today, trying to see what it's like to do Saturday to Sunday. I know I'm competing with a very busy NFL schedule, opening weekend. It was a lot of fun, just finished watching some myself. But it would be great to talk some history, have questions asked, answer any questions you may have about history, talk about social sciences, whatever you would like to talk about. I am here to bring that up. That's what Friendly Neighborhood History is all about, discussing history in a friendly and neighborly manner. Although I am pretty sure that at some point I'm going to have to change the name of the channel due to copyright because, Spider-Man. So we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. And if anyone has any ideas about a new name for the channel, be sure to drop them in the chat, along with liking and subscribing. That really, really helps out. Any feedback, any comments, any questions you have are really, really appreciated. I appreciate all the feedback and participation we've gotten. These live streams have been going on most of the summer, now into the fall, and just been really enjoyable. So really appreciate all the support trying to grow the channel, trying to hit 5,000 subscribers. I usually don't set these kinds of goals, but I'm trying to hit 5,000 subscribers by the end of the year. We're at 4,400 plus, so lots of love and support in just 6 months. It's really been a fantastic journey. I've got daily content dropping on a bunch of different topics. Right now I'm finishing up a series on the Roman Empire, and I've got 2 longer videos dropping, one today and one either tomorrow or Tuesday, that will discuss the Roman Empire and its fall and the last couple of emperors there. So I've been doing short videos about that, longer videos, check them out. And any ideas for a new topic, a new series that I can be doing would be much appreciated. Really, really appreciate that. So usually during these Q&As and these chats, I take any suggestions, topics, comments you guys want to talk about. And of course, I've got some of my own that I would like to discuss. And one of the ones that I really wanted to discuss today was the Civil War. That is a topic that is obviously very interesting. Yesterday we talked a lot about Daryl Cooper's misunderstandings about World War II and how bad history exists. So today it's mainly good history. Well, not good history because there's a lot of death and destruction and sadness in the Civil War, but at least a history that's a little bit more consistent where people aren't trying to skew it all the time. And that's the history of the Civil War. Any good history can be corrupted. Any good story can be corrupted. Any bad story can be revisited in a light that it doesn't belong in. And that's just kind of how history works. It's a difficult enterprise to deal with at times. So anyways, so wanted to discuss the Civil War and the different factors that led to the North winning the Civil War and how the Civil War was actually fought, the causes of it, things like that. Thank you. Appreciate the compliment. That's very complimental of you. So anyways, the Civil War obviously begins in 1861, but many people could argue that it actually had started before then. So I'm going to look at some of the causes of a Civil War, and then I'm going to discuss what actually happened. So the major cause of a Civil War is slavery. I've said that on channel many, many times. But basically, human history has involved slavery in many different ways. American slavery was unique because it was race-based and it was chattel slavery. There was chattel slavery in other parts of the world, but not necessarily race-based chattel slavery. There's all sorts of slavery. If you like what I'm talking about, if you enjoy it, be sure to drop a comment, drop a like, subscribe. Really helps out the channel. But anyways, so a lot of people like to say that there are many different reasons for why the Civil War actually happened and what happened during the Civil War, but the major reason that caused the Civil War is slavery. And slavery had been a defining feature in dividing the North and the South from each other for really ever since the creation of the American Republic. The founders knew this, and the founders had hoped that slavery would die out over time. They believed that slavery was a dead-on-arrival institution. It was handicapping the South's economy, and it would eventually lead to its destruction. Now, of course, that didn't stop them from owning slaves. Franklin owned slaves for a short time. Washington obviously had a large plantation with slaves that he refused to let go until after his wife died, mainly because they were his wife's slaves. Jefferson owned slaves, even had affairs with some of his slaves, and there people have thrown out that R word in reference to his affair with the slave Sally Hemings, that he used his power and authority over her to force her to have relations with him. But basically, the founders all basically thought that slavery was a dead-on-arrival institution, that it was handicapping the South from developing, and that it would fall apart. Right after they made the Constitution, in which they denied condemning slavery, just like they did in the Declaration of Independence, after that, the cotton gin got created. And the cotton gin made the cotton industry much more lucrative and much more demanding. And with more and more supply of cotton and an easier way to ship it, the prices went up and the value went up, and obviously the slave market continued to grow. Now, a common misconception is that the South was generally like what you see in a movie like Gone with the Wind, this antebellum Old South notion. And this has been promoted by a lot of people. Some people have promoted it who really want to condemn the United States for slavery, condemn the South for the atrocities of slavery, and condemn uh, whites completely for the atrocities of slavery, particularly in the American South. But that's not fully accurate or fair. A lot of slavery that occurred in the South, the vast majority of people who owned slaves in the South owned a small amount of slaves. They did not own large plantations like we see in Gone with the Wind. The other side wants to say that some people in the South to this day want to romanticize the Old South. They want to romanticize the antebellum era, that it was a good era. Thank you for that like. I really appreciate it. It helps the channel grow. If you're enjoying what I'm talking about, be sure to like and subscribe. Really will help me out. But a lot of people like to romanticize the South and romanticize and think, oh, if we could just go back there. So there's like these two extremes of either that both are historically ignorant because they paint the South as all these big giant plantations with rich white people being pampered by their slaves, who they took care of, and all of that nonsense. And that is nonsense because not only was that rare, but it was also obviously not taking care of slaves by, keeping them enslaved, forcing them into labor, not paying them, and if they misbehaved, were beaten. For most of human history, slavery had existed, and a lot of people really didn't think that slavery was an issue. The whole question was if you treat your slaves correctly or not. There are provisions for slavery in the Bible, in the Quran. The African slave trade had begun because the Arabs could not trade, the Muslim Arabs could not enslave other Muslims, but they could enslave non-Muslims. So they started trading with African kingdoms who were already enslaving each other through warfare. And the Europeans went down to Africa and started trading in the 15th and 16th century, and that led to them eventually getting slaves. The vast majority of slaves were sent to South America, as well as Latin America and the Caribbean. Huge slave populations in the Caribbean. You can see that trickling down through history of places like Haiti and Jamaica. There are large slave populations in Brazil. The Portuguese are particularly nasty. And of course, hundreds of thousands are sent to what is now the United States. Hello, welcome. Thank you for coming. So, talking about slavery, the causes of a civil war. So the antebellum South has a bunch of slaves, and a large portion of the antebellum South is a slave population, about 40% by the start of the Civil War. However, they were not all living on giant plantations. They were not all in Tara-like places from Gone with the Wind. Most of them were actually owned. Slaves were owned in small bunches, like 2, 3, 4, in a group by one particular semi-wealthy individual. It wasn't cheap or easy to keep slaves. And slaves often, because slavery is so awful, were often rebelling and trying to get their freedom, understandably. So what else happens? So basically, the slave issue divides the North and the South more and more because more and more northern states, which originally, when they were colonies, had slaves, got rid of slavery at the beginning of the American experiment. Meanwhile, the southern states continue to multiply their number of slaves and continue to rely on slavery to grow their society and grow their economy. So the economic differences is because they don't rely on slavery, the North has to find other means of building an economy. And the main means they do is through industrialization. So they start to build factories, textile mills. They import British and French industrialization. They start building railroads. They use the invention of steam and steel to really embrace the Industrial Revolution, which is sweeping across Europe, started in England and is imported to the United States, particularly in the 1830s and 40s. So the North grows a lot. At the same time, immigrants are coming over to the United States in large droves. And because you've got so many immigrants, you've got a lot of them settling in the cities of the North. And those immigrants are building the population. So by the time of the Civil War, the North is a lot more populous than the South. And it's like 21 million to 9 million. And a huge amount of them are immigrants and the children of immigrants, mainly immigrants from Germany, Scandinavia, and Ireland. I haven't seen a history reenactment, but I really would like to. I mean, I've seen plenty of clips. I've watched a lot of documentaries where they're kind of, or docudramas where there's kind of these live reenactments going on, but I've never actually been to a Civil War reenactment. I mean, they're the most popular form of historical reenactments, and they do them all the time, so I should definitely go. The top two types of popular history where people can go and perform and see performances are obviously Renaissance fairs and Civil War reenactments. So those are very popular. So basically, the Civil War, during it, you have, or before the Civil War, you have a growing divide between the culture of World War II reenactment. Now that sounds like a lot of fun. That's something I definitely would want to go to. But what was I going to say? So, anyways, the what was I going to say? Oh yeah, so the civil, a lot of the slaves. We are discussing. I'm discussing the Civil War and talking about its causes and effects. I'm going to talk about how the North won the Civil War. I've been talking about a lot about World War II, so I wanted to shift it up and talk about the Civil War a bit. So, but if you have anything you would like to discuss, please bring it up. Drop a comment, a topic, a question in the chat, and we will get to it very, very soon. If you like this kind of content, be sure to drop a like and subscribe. It really helps grow the channel. I was announcing I don't usually set goals on subscribers, but I'm trying to get to 5,000 subscribers by the end of the year. We've got a breakneck pace of 4,000 subscribers in just 6 months. It was really wonderful. We're over 4,600 right now. So anyways, what was I talking about? Why did Texas lose the thingy? What thingy? And by the Alamo. Oh, that's a great question. That actually is connected a little bit to what I'm talking about. So, the Alamo was never supposed to be a Texas victory. I love learning about the Texas War for Independence. It's such an interesting thing, and I'm starting to learn a little bit more about Mexican history. So, Mexico gets its independence from Spain in the 1820s, 1821, partly because of Napoleon. Spain was taken over by Napoleon's brother in the 1810s, and they fought a war to overthrow him, and they did overthrow him. And after they overthrew him, Mexico kind of has a guerrilla war independence movement and eventually becomes its own country. And in the 1830s, they're ruled by a president, general, governor, dictator named Santa Anna. And Santa Anna basically forces the Texans. There's a bunch of Americans who go to live in Texas who say they are nominally Catholic, and they make up a bunch of things about who they are. And they basically show up and they start settling. They build farms, they build communities, and they eventually outnumber the number of Mexicans in Texas. And this leads to a rebellion because they don't want to be under the control of a Mexican government. They don't want to have to say that they're Catholic. And Santa Anna, like the British at the beginning of the American Revolution, tried to seize munitions and weapons because the Texans were arming themselves, and that led to the Texas Revolution. The Alamo was a mission in San Antonio, just like the missions in California, built for proselytizing the natives and getting a Spanish fort. So it was a mission, but also a fort. And the Mexicans, Santa Anna's forces, were besieged it. And the Texans knew they couldn't win. They didn't have that many troops compared to Santa Anna. The whole point was to stall and hold them off while Sam Houston mobilized and consolidated the forces that he had. Houston was the leader of the Texas Revolution. And you've got men like Stephen Austin. You have Jim Bowie, who has the Bowie knife named after him. He's a famous explorer. And of course, I think it's Davy Crockett. Yeah, David Crockett. So these guys all stand up for the Texans and eventually lose their lives at the Alamo, but it becomes a rallying cry for the Texans, and they win a huge, huge victory at the Battle of San Jacinto, and they become independent. And then they form their own republic for like 10 years, and then they join the Union. The U.S. didn't want to originally put them in their country because they were worried about the spread of slavery. So during the 1840s and 50s, as slavery becomes more and more of a hot button issue, as more and more people in the North oppose it, and more people in the South defend it, and no one wants to see it as just something that's part of life. People either want to condemn it or they want to defend it. I'm trying. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I saw that. I didn't get to respond to it. Usually, I try to respond as quickly as possible to the questions because I've got a lot of great comments. Except for people who call me misogynistic and racist, like I got called yesterday. That was fun. Basically, yeah, people are always asking me. Someone told me to vote asteroid. it's I talk a little bit about the politics when I give political analysis. I don't give my political opinions. At least I try to be as objective as possible. I did put up a poll recently where I said that where I asked people which orientation do they think I have, and most people voted that I'm right leaning. So I'm trying to be. I'm sorry if I've given that impression away. I'm not saying I am, not saying I'm not, but I'm trying to be as fair-minded and objective as possible on the channel when I discuss history and even when I discuss politics. So, anyways, I will do one of those political maps where they make a prediction right before the election. I think those are pretty cool. So it was originally put out. So Michelangelo's David is in Florence, and he built it for the Florentines. Thank you for doing that. I really appreciate that. He built it for the people of Florence and who loved David from the Bible. And he originally put it out in the middle of a piazza so people could see it when they were walking. It was moved to a rotunda, I think, in a museum there in the 1900s or 1800s. But originally the statue of David, which we all know because we all can picture it and we can see it being kind of in a building, was actually out in the open for people to look at. And most sculptures were like that. It's not the first David of the Renaissance. Donatello's was the first. And yes, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are named after the, four famous Renaissance sculptors and artists: Leonardo, Michelangelo, Raphael, and Donatello. Why they did that, I don't know, but it's kind of fun. So anyways, what was I going to say? Yes, I do think that's going to be a possibility. A lot of people have wondered why it hasn't happened yet, and they say we went to the moon, why can't we go to Mars? When the U.S. lands on the moon in 1969, the Soviets say, oh, well, it doesn't matter, just so it only matters who can get to Mars. Mars is hundreds of millions of miles, or is it hundreds of millions of miles away? And the moon is hundreds of thousands. Tens of millions versus hundreds of thousands. And so getting there is like the difference between me from walking from my home to the store, or from my home to in the United States all the way to Peru. So the Leper King, I did a little bit of a video on him. I've got a series about the Crusaders. King Baldwin IV of Jerusalem supposedly wore a mask to shield people so that they wouldn't see his physical deformities. And the Saracens, the Muslims, under the great general Saladin, were scared of him, partly because of his leprosy. But he was also a really great general, and if he hadn't had leprosy, he's from a Franco-European line that kind of rules this area in the Holy Land called the Kingdom of Jerusalem. And he actually is able to withstand the Muslims and defeat them, and it's after he dies that Saladin feels confident enough to take Jerusalem, which leads to the famous Third Crusade with King Richard the Lionheart, who I just did a video on today. Yeah, it would take 2 lifetimes. And if we ever develop the technology, it would take like 3 or 4 years. So it'd be a round trip of about 8 or 9 years, because you have to include how long are they going to be at Mars, what are they going to do there. It's not going to be that easy. But I mean, we've got technology that we didn't think we would have. I just went and saw the Reagan movie yesterday, and it was a very good movie. It was a little jingoistic and definitely biased towards Reagan. But one thing that they talked about that I appreciated was the SDI initiative, the Strategic Defense Initiative, of using lasers to shoot down missiles. And it was kind of a bluff, and it kind of worked. But now we've got Elon Musk and others talking about that's actually a possibility. So that which seems so out of whack 40 years ago is now right at home for us. I haven't seen it yet. I'm going to. Everyone asks me about that. Hacksaw Ridge, the story of Desmond Doss. I will not forget that. So anyways, back to the Civil War. I think, or was I answering? I hope I answered the Michelangelo question. Thank you. I'm really appreciative of that you got the World War II Geek to subscribe. If you like what you're hearing, if you're enjoying this, if you're joining us for the first time, be sure to drop a like or comment, subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. So anyways, what's going on? Oh yeah, so there's more and more sovereign states, which means there's less people, but there's more senators, which means they have fewer members of the House of Representatives. But most of the presidents have been from the South, and with more people or more states, they have more senators in the United States Senate. So the sovereign states have more voting influence, and they're going to vote for slavery. And they tried a number of different compromises, the Compromise of 1820, and thank you, I really appreciate that. You're so sweet, or nice, I should say. Anyways, so they try the compromises of 1820 and the compromises of 1850. They don't really work. They kind of put off the issue, and by the middle of the 1850s, it's getting really bad. And violence between pro-slavery and anti-slavery forces breaks out long before that. First off, you have at least two major slave rebellions. I know that there's more. The first one is the Virginia Rebellion, led by Gabriel Prosser in the early 1800s. He believed he was a religiously guided by God to free the slaves. He builds up a large coalition of slaves. However, someone leaks his plans to the Virginia governor, and he sends in the militia and crushes the revolt, and Prosser and his other leaders are hung. And then the Nat Turner Rebellion in the early 1830s is obviously much more well known, also in Virginia. That one gets close to succeeding, but Turner is put down and killed. And despite the fact that these rebellions don't go anywhere, they do inspire a lot of anti-slavery rhetoric and feeling, especially in the North, leading to the abolitionist movement. At the same time, have you seen the movie The Scarlet and the Black? It is a true. I think I've heard about it. I've heard about that one, and I've been wanting to see it. I'll never get enough of docudramas and documentaries and films about history. What else was I going to say? So, the real fighting before the Civil War breaks out in Kansas and Nebraska in the 1850s. They called it Bleeding Kansas because what happened was Democratic Senator Stephen Douglas came up with this idea that instead of determining which territories should be slave and which territories should be free, the states should decide for themselves whether they want slavery or not. Douglas did not understand how impassioned people were about the slavery issue, so a bunch of pro-slavery and anti-slavery people funnel into Kansas so that they can vote and turn it into either a slave or a free state. And they find out that the people living across from them are opposed to their views, and this leads to kind of a mini civil war in Kansas. Different skirmishes, fighting, kind of similar to what we see right now in the West Bank, where you have both sides killing each other, attacking each other, brutalizing each other, and they called it Bleeding Kansas. So there's actually fighting over slavery in that territory before the Civil War got started. Harriet Tubman, I don't know if she actually led an actual revolt, but that is something that is part of the story. So in the 1850s, the two parties, the Democrats and the Whigs, compromised and agreed to allow slave owners to go to the North and take their slaves back, and to force people in the North to allow them to do that and to help them do that. In order to escape, there's a series of underground locations that are selected that are kind of hush-hush, and the secret organization called the Underground Railroad, which is not a railroad, but a system of different houses, barns, lots, places of land where slaves go and hide so that they can get to the North and eventually to Canada, because at this point, their slave owners are allowed to go to the North and take them, and the Northerners are not allowed to stop that. So this happens a lot. So you've got the Underground Railroad, you have fugitive slave law, you have fighting in Kansas. So really, slavery has divided the nation to a point where it is really, really tearing apart. People like to say that there's more division now than there's ever been, and America is more divided than it's ever been. And of course, every politician says this. This is the most important election of our lifetime, and your freedoms are on the line. And people say that in other countries too. And America is particularly pernicious. But 1860 may take the cake as the most consequential lifetime election in the lifetime of America. Because the Democrats are so divided, they split into two parties, the Northern versus the Southern. This split vote allows the Republicans, a new party, to elect Abraham Lincoln. Now, the South goes absolutely ballistic about Lincoln getting elected. They think that Lincoln is going to take away their slaves. Lincoln took kind of the position of the Founding Fathers. He didn't want slavery to spread into the Western territories, but he was okay with letting slavery be contained to the South. He believed that it would be starved and die out. He hated slavery, but he didn't want to fight a war over it. He said, if I can keep the Union together without freeing a single slave, I would do it. And a lot of people have taken that quote totally out of context to say Lincoln really didn't care about the slaves. No, it was all strategy. The Republican Party was not the party of abolition. Abolition was an extreme form of the anti-slavery movement. Lincoln was personally an abolitionist, but not when it came to policy. However, despite this, the South doesn't believe him. They don't trust him. Am I going to make a stream on the 11th? I'm still thinking about that. I might. I'm not sure. Obviously, a consequential day. I'll definitely make a video about what happened that day. But I'm not sure. So, I mean, I don't want to draw attention to myself on a day of mourning. I don't know if that's right. I mean, and I could talk about it, but I've talked about it a lot on the channel. I'm going to make a video about it that day, probably a longer video. So maybe not, but I'm still thinking. Anyways, so Lincoln basically, English or Spanish. I speak both. Yo hablo todo. So, what was I going to say? Oh, yeah. So basically, they fear that Lincoln is going to take away their slaves, so they decide to leave. That's totally a conspiratorial idea. It really doesn't have any basis in reality, but the southern states start to leave. South Carolina, I probably butchered that Spanish, by the way. I'm not always at my best. I'm very good at reading it. My pronunciation is, I think it's decent enough. I've tried really hard, but so forgive me if I ruin that. But anyways, so they fear that Lincoln's going to take away their slaves, so a bunch of southern states break away. A bunch of states refuse to give up their that have slaves are still questioning whether or not to leave the Union. Even California and Oregon, new states have to decide about that, English or Germany. Well, I speak English. I do not sprechen Deutsch, but but yeah, it's an interesting language and it'd be fun to learn. I don't speak hardly any Japanese. I am doing more and more history on Japan. I just did a video a couple weeks ago about the very famous Yasuki, a black samurai from Africa who was brought over by Portuguese enslavers. And I'm looking over here because I'm reading Shogun at the moment. Oh yeah, during World War II, I'm definitely on the side of the English. If you watched the live stream yesterday and you heard what I had to say about the comments made on Tucker Carlson's podcast by Daryl Cooper, definitely with England. Right. So, I mean, what is the Holocaust? I think, well, I talked about that yesterday too. I think you know what it is, and yeah. Well, Franklin Roosevelt was the U.S. president during World War II. So, and at first he didn't want to join the war, but he kind of got roped into it. Yeah, the stream yesterday was good. We had some good talks, and you were definitely missed, but you can definitely go back and watch it. Yeah, Franklin Roosevelt, cousin of President Teddy Roosevelt, who actually married Teddy Roosevelt's niece, Eleanor Roosevelt, who was his cousin. Yeah. Don't worry about missing it. Just go back and watch it. I really appreciate it. I understand people are busy and they've got things to do. When will World War III happen? I don't know. It could happen very soon. I hope it doesn't happen. Actually good, as opposed to normally when it sucks. Thank you. So a lot of people think World War III is going to happen very soon. I have talked about on the channel how I think that there have actually already been 3 world wars. This war would be the 4th one because the French-Indian War, aka the 7 Years' War in the 1750s, involved 4 different continents and fighting with a bunch of different ethnic groups. It just involved large-scale empires fighting everywhere, like World War II, World War I, and World War II. So I would argue there have been 3 world wars, so this, unfortunately, if it happens, would be the 4th one. Yeah. Thoughts on Kennedy? Which Kennedy? JFK or the current one? Yeah. And I've explained that before on the channel. I probably should make a video explaining exactly why I think that. JFK. Thoughts on him? I mean, I was mentioning earlier how I went and I watched the Reagan movie yesterday, and they had some archival footage of Kennedy. And something that Kennedy and Reagan both had that struck me, and that being from a Democrat and a Republican, they are both extraordinarily good speakers, and they both inspire this idea of things are going to be better. And they don't lie to do it. They don't use platitudes to do it. In fact, they may have created the platitudes. And they give you, and I know it's a cult of personality thing, but they give you a sense of hope, and they do that without hitting you over the head with it. So, yes, a lot of people say World War III did not start yet. If you were listening to anything I just said, I explained that I think that there have been 3 world wars because I think that the 7 Years' War, which happened in Europe, Africa, India, and the United States, all could be easily considered a world war. Can I play an instrument? I can play the trumpet and the guitar. I don't play them well, and I haven't played them in a while. Talk about Alexander the Great, one of the greatest generals in all of history, conqueror, all of that wonderful stuff, builds a giant Greek empire, gets all the way to India before his troops demand he turns back. Everywhere he conquers, he decides to name a city after him, which is really, really annoying, which is why we have Alexandrias in Persia and in Egypt. And basically, and for somehow in Virginia, but Alexander obviously builds a giant empire at a young age. He uses the Greek phalanx, which are the special op forces of the day, again wisely against the Persians and the Egyptians, the people of Israel, all of these areas, and he builds a giant empire and then divides it amongst his generals. Well, he has a son, and he dies, but his generals see the opportunity because his son is obviously very young, because Alexander is only in his 30s, and they divide up the empire. And so and I did a really, really popular video about this, but you get four generals: Antiochus, Seleucus, Lysander, and Ptolemy, or Cassander, not Lysander. And Seleucus is actually the most successful. He takes over Persia and the Fertile Crescent and Israel, and that's called the Seleucid Empire. He eventually defeats Antagonus and takes over Turkey, but that later breaks away. And Seleucus goes all the way back to Greece and reconquers it. Egypt is taken by the Ptolemaic dynasty, which will be the last Egyptian pharaohic dynasty until the Romans come with Julius Caesar. So, yeah, so Hitler does take his own life, although there are plenty of conspiracy theories and rumors, and I'm sure that Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson will be talking about them very, very soon, which just makes my skin crawl. But yes, Hitler takes cyanide with Eva Braun, his mistress, who I think he married her right before they off themselves, and then he shoots himself. And they find his bunker, and soon after that, and it's at the very end of World War II. Let's see here. Just jumped in a few minutes ago as a history buff getting. Thank you. I really appreciate you jumping in, and I appreciate coming from Liverpool. I love hearing when people are from other parts of the world. I've gotten people who can't sleep coming from India and Australia. I'm from the United States. I'm not going to say particularly where, but in London right now, it's 10:30. So thank you for joining. And I've had people joining and saying, oh, it's 4:30 in the morning. I can't sleep, so I joined your channel. And of course, after listening to me talk for a few minutes, they're asleep. Thank you. I really appreciate that. If you like what you're hearing, if you enjoy this content, if you really do think I'm a genius, hit the like button, subscribe, notify yourself. It would be great to hear from you guys and see you in channel and see you. We do live streams every Saturday at 6 Eastern, midnight London time. And we do Sundays at 4 o'clock Eastern time, 10 o'clock in Paris. Thank you for the subscription. Really appreciate it. Yeah. What was the cause of his death? A bullet shot. Yeah. 9:34. So it's 8 hours. I always thought it was, or 6 hours, or I thought it was 6 hours ahead of New York. Because I'm thinking Pacific, I'm thinking Eastern time. Those are the two most popular time zones in the United States. Interesting. Yeah. And as you can tell, it's clearly daylight, so you can probably figure that out even without me saying anything. I talked about Alexander the Great, talked about the Cold War, talked about JFK. Hoped I answered all your questions there. Really appreciate all the support and the good topics we're discussing. What's your view on the Russia-Ukraine war? I think the war should end. From what I am reading, Russian history is my particular specialty. It's my favorite topic, my favorite history. 5 Eastern Coast hours, 8 hours. Interesting. Okay. Oh, so it changes. I see. Interesting. So 8 hours. I thought it was 9 hours ahead of the Pacific West. Anyways, it's 2:05 in India. Yes. So that makes it, let's see here, ahead of New York. That makes it, my math isn't good right now. Anyways, about 10 hours. So I think the war should end, and I think it should end quickly. I want all wars to end quickly. I think that Ukraine should win. I don't think, when I look at history and I look at World War II, the big thing that people were saying is that they wanted to appease Hitler, and that didn't work. Appeasing Putin wouldn't work. He shouldn't have a free hand to do whatever he wants. However, the Russians seem to kind of be in tatters right now, and they might be willing to negotiate and put down their arms. I don't know why the war is continuing, or why it should continue. I think there's a lot of politics, especially in the United States, around it surrounding the election. I have heard rumors. I haven't confirmed them. I haven't read enough about it that the war was going to end, and certain people said no. I don't know if that's true. But anyways, so the sooner the war ends, obviously, the better for the Russians and the Ukrainian people who have suffered the most. I definitely think that when an aggressor country invades, it usually is not justified, and therefore it's easy to say Ukraine has a right to defend themselves. Yes, so King Baldwin the Fourth, I talked about him just a couple minutes ago. He is the famous leper king who stood up to Saladin and the Arabs in the 1180s and withstood their onslaught. I'll get to that, the Ethiopia-Italy War, which I just have been learning about, and is so fascinating, by the way. It's Europe's breadbasket. Yeah, the Ukraine has all, people call it the Ukraine. It is Ukraine. Ukraine has always been wow, you guys are bringing up some great topics. I can't wait to talk about all this. Ukraine has always been one of the biggest bread baskets in Europe, just like Egypt was during the ancient times. But King Baldwin basically is able to use both his disease and his excellent military skills at a very young age to withstand the Muslims and their great ruler Saladin. And it's the Ayyubid dynasty in Egypt and Syria. And he's able to withstand it. And it's after he dies that the Muslims take over Jerusalem, and they never lose it again. He's a fascinating character. He was French from a line, I think, who set up the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Very, really fascinating stuff. So the Ethiopia-Italy War is a war between where Mussolini invades Ethiopia in the 1930s. Some people would say World War II, or in my opinion, World War III, starts when not when China is invaded by Japan in the Second Sino-Japanese War in 1937, nor Pearl Harbor, nor when Germany invades Poland, but when Italy invades Ethiopia. Ethiopia was the one of two African countries who, through their cunning and guile of their emperor, and because they were Christian, had resisted European colonization in the late 19th century. And because they resisted that colonization, they were able to remain independent. The only other country to do that was Liberia, because the United States, which had created Liberia by sending slaves back to Africa, had said, no one's touching Liberia. Liberia is actually, the people there are the descendants of American slaves sent back to Africa in the first half of the 19th century, which is connected to what I was talking about earlier with the Civil War. For those of you just joining, thank you so much. This is a weekly Q&A for the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. Drop anything you'd like to talk about social studies-wise in the chat, and I will get to it. Make sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel if you enjoy hearing my voice and what I'm talking about, because people seem to like one or the other, or both. So, but anyway, so Mussolini takes his forces into Ethiopia to conquer it, and he's very successful. He overthrows the emperor, Haile Selassie, who becomes a hero for the Africans and for the Rastafari movement, who come to believe that he is the second coming of Jesus Christ, and he becomes their Messiah. Selassie stands up to the fascists and goes to the League of Nations and condemns what they do, and he draws attentions to the barbarism of the Italians. They use chemical weapons. And they fight for that land, and eventually during World War II later on, the British and the Americans push them out of Ethiopia and put Selassie back on the throne, which he will stay in until he is killed by the communists in the 1970s. But yeah, it's Italy already owned Libya because of a division of Africa in the 1800s, but they had always wanted Ethiopia and they hadn't quite gotten it. They take over Ethiopia and Somalia, and then the Allies push them out because Italy does piss poor in the war compared to the United States, Germany, Great Britain, and Russia. They do better than France, but that's not saying much in World War II. Is nuclear war possible? Yes and no. And I'm answering it that way because in some ways it is, because people, they are there and they can be used. And in some ways it is not. And that was something I saw in the Reagan movie a lot yesterday, was despite the fact that you've got all of these weapons pointed, just ready to destroy millions of lives, even really strong war hawks like Reagan were able to realize that that is not going to work. We can't just wipe out millions of people. It's cataclysmically awful. Thousands of nuclear warheads pointed at each other. So it's theoretically possible, but as Dwight Eisenhower wisely predicted, if you build them up, you can use them as a deterrent to avoid larger wars like a world war. So there hasn't been a world war in 80 years, and one of the reasons there might likely have not been a world war in 80 years is because you've got super weapons that are deterring people from using them. It's a counterintuitive way of looking at it, but I think it works. Unification of the UK. I'm not sure exactly what you mean there, but obviously England is taken over by the French in the Normans in the 1060s. Those become the English as we know them. They conquer Wales in the 1200s, then Scotland in the 1600s, kind of because the King of Scotland is also the King of England. And when Scotland fails in creating a new world colony in the early 1700s, they signed the first Act of Union. Then in the middle of the 1600s, the English conquer all of Ireland after kind of settling it on and off for the last few centuries. And so that's where you get the UK. And obviously in 1922, Ireland becomes independent. Southern Ireland and Northern Ireland stays part of the British Empire. So that's a quick welcome. Thank you for coming. I'm sorry if you left already. I'd hate for you to leave without me saying hello. That's so mean of me. Yeah, that's definitely Russia's story. They're always fighting for more land, and because they get more land, they kind of collapse in on themselves because they don't have enough space. They stretch their resources too thin. That's definitely a problem for them. So that's an excellent observation, Snake, on exactly why this happened. Yes, you could definitely swipe a credit card for these teeth. Thank you for commenting on my physical appearance. I know I have a gap. I very well aware of it. They're not the best teeth in the world, but I'm not here to show you perfect teeth. I'm here to talk about history. The Battle of Ottawa. I don't know what that is. Is that from the Ethio-Italy War? Thoughts on the Korean War? Today's actually the anniversary. Oh, I forgot to do it in my Today in History videos. But today's anniversary of, at the end of World War II, because during World War II, Japan occupied Korea. Korea was kind of being tossed back and forth between the Japanese and the Chinese during the late 19th and early 20th century. But during the World War II, the Japanese had occupied Korea. And basically, the Soviets go in and occupy North Korea, and they're going to set up a communist dictatorship there with the help of communist China. And the U.S. is occupying Japan and South Korea. And so basically, those two lands get divided. The rumor is that Churchill is actually the one who says the communists can get the North and the U.S. can get the South. And that's how they punish Japan at the end of World War II. They take Korea away from them. And so basically, North Korea invades South Korea to spread communism there. And the UN, led by the U.S., retaliates, leading to the Korean War. The U.S. uses Japan as its main base of operations, and the communists from and the U.S. does poorly at first, but Douglas MacArthur does this amazing reverse Uno card on the Koreans by landing at the Incheon Peninsula in North Korea, invading the North and forcing the Koreans to go back there. They almost pushed the communists all the way out of North Korea, and then the Chinese send in over 1 million soldiers, and the war is eventually thought to a stalemate. President Truman fires MacArthur because MacArthur wants to push them into China, and Truman thinks that will cause a nuclear war with the Soviets. And Dwight Eisenhower is elected president, promising to end the Korean War, and he does. And it's not ended, it's in an armistice. There's a ceasefire, and you have a demilitarized zone, and President Trump was the first American president to cross the demilitarized zone and meet with a North Korean leader in North Korea. Is it possible? It could be. I just don't see it happening anytime soon. Yes, thank you for telling me Churchill was the bad guy. If you really think Churchill was the bad guy and that Daryl Cooper has a good head on his shoulders, please listen to the live stream yesterday and any of my recent videos about the bombing of Britain. Churchill had problems. He had a lot of faults. I was talking about Lincoln and his views about slavery and the founding fathers. They had faults too, but Churchill is definitely not the bad guy. I don't know if the Ethiopians participated in the Korean War. I'm not sure. I know that Selassie became a huge ally of the West because of the British and the French and the Americans helping him retake his. And so he actually opposed liberalization movements, decolonization, things like that, because he was worried about communism, being a devout Christian, but he was also very worried about losing the support of the West, who had put him on power. So he was indebted to them. Love you too. The 2611 Mumbai terror. I don't know about that. In India. Interesting. St. Thomas the Apostle. Well, that actually is connected. I think somebody mentioned India. St. Thomas the Apostle, according to church tradition, Christian church tradition, went and started the church in India and died there after the resurrection of Christ. I don't know much more other than that. Is that true? Is that really true? Or is that, because that sounds like a story that might be true. Churchill smoked cigars, he drank a lot, and if he really did eat sardines, then that guy stank. Because that's a horrible combination. Cigars, alcohol, sardines. Yikes. If that's true, I mean, that's just so interesting. Interesting fact about Interesting. So the British can do it independently. I've read that Russian submarines during the Cold War did think about striking the U.S. multiple times in the Cuban Missile Crisis, and then again in the early '80s. As a historian, when will the world end? There's no historical precedent for saying when the world will end. Science says that the sun will explode in billions of years. I don't know if humanity is going to last that long. I really don't. My personal beliefs about that, my personal ideas around that, are not associated at all with my history. But this channel and this feed and this Q&A is all associated with history. So I appreciate all the great comments and questions and support. Even if I don't have thousands of people in the feed, it doesn't matter because I've got you guys, and you guys are awesome, and I really appreciate that. And I will all remember you when this channel is something else, hopefully. So interesting. How fossil age? So they use is carbon dating based off of where layers, based off of the age of rocks. They associate that if a fossil is buried in a certain area of rock, that it therefore must have a certain age because of the age of the rock. Yes, that makes a lot of sense. It's not like you guys have a lot of space. No offense. I don't have moderators. I probably should get some. I've had one before who puts my social media handles in, and he was unavailable today, but he will be back hopefully next week putting social media handles in, because I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, and I'm on X, which we will always call Twitter. But anyways, so wow, that's crazy if that's true about Churchill. But anyways, so getting back to the major topic I was discussing. Major topic I was discussing. Sure, I wouldn't mind that. Let me see here. Can I make you one right now? There you go, buddy. Okay, so talking about Civil War and sure. I mean, I can't give them out like they're candy, but you guys are extraordinarily loyal and helpful. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for your help, support. Okay. So, anyways, thank you. What was I going to talk about next? So obviously the big thing that's coming up now, Hitler's children. I'm trying to think if Hitler had children. I think he did. I don't know what happened to them. I know that Stalin's daughter moved to the United States and opened a clothing store in Seattle, which is really funny. I forget her name. It's something like Ivan Stalin or something like that. Thank you for saying that. Thank you. He had pets. Yeah, Hitler was an interesting guy. So a lot of people kind of think of him as this brash exterior, and he definitely has that to him. But Hitler was a vegetarian. He loved dogs. He kind of, I don't want to say this lightly because it's hard to say anything lightly when you're talking about such a brutal, nasty, evil dictator. But Hitler had this kind of this squishy underbelly to him that was kind of, I guess, kind of hipstery. I don't want to say it like that, but you know, vegetarian, kind of a dog parent more than an actual parent. It's an incredible story. I've talked about it a lot on the channel. I love the Diary of Anne Frank. Yeah, Hitler was also an artist. He wanted to be an artist. So the rumor is he hated Jews because he didn't succeed in art. That's not true. The mayor of Vienna, where he was not from Germany, he was from Austria, riled him up into hating, was an anti-Semite, and anti-Semitism was common in Europe. The idea that Hitler just brought up anti-Semitism in Europe is sadly not true. It'd actually be better if it was just one crazy kook who got a lot of people on his mind, into his hive mind. But no, anti-Semitism was a present, real force. The Nazis really antagonized it and accentuated it. He was kind of so he's got that starving artist, kind of that. I want to say liberal hippie, but it's anachronistic, and you wouldn't ever think of Hitler as liberal or hippie. But yeah, it's a fantastic book. I'm so glad you're reading it about Anne Frank. So the history there is, it's called Het Achterhuis, which was the story of the back house, the safe space where she stayed, and her entire family perished, including her in the Holocaust, except her father, Otto Frank. And he was encouraged after the war to publish his daughter's journal. He didn't want to do it, but he eventually gave in. How old is the Earth? So historians have dealt with history. Cosmology is a little different, but a lot of historians see the beginning of history between 6 to 10,000 years when you have recorded writings and people living in cities. Yeah, that's a rumor about his parents that one was Jewish. I'm not sure if that's true. Mein Kampf is his personal, it means my struggle. It is his personal autobiography that he dictated while he was in jail for trying to overthrow the German government. And basically, if you read it, it basically says everything all the murderous threats that he was already breathing out were there. Yeah. So, soldier? I don't know what you mean by that. So, anyways, SS soldier. Rasputin is not alive, but he definitely survived a lot. When they tried to kill Rasputin, they shot him, they poisoned him, then they shot him, then they shot him again, then they shot him again, and he just wouldn't die. So they took him out and they beat him with clubs until he was all mashed up and nasty looking. Then they took him and threw him into the river, the cold. I forget the name of the river that runs through St. Petersburg. The cold, icy. I think it's the Nerva River, and he froze. And when they found his body, there was still water in his lungs. And Rasputin, by the way, is probably at least partly responsible for the Russian Empire falling apart. I'm trying to make it full time. That's why I'm doing the channel. But thank you for asking. So Rasputin is not alive anymore, and we can all be grateful for that, but that guy could take a punch and a gunshot wound and poison and being beaten by clubs, because when they found his body, he was still breathing. Or at least he had been breathing in the water before he drowned. Yes, I do need chapstick. Thank you. I ran out of it. Usually I put it on. I remember somebody was teasing me about that on one video, so I made a revenge video, I guess you would call it. Maybe that's what Taylor Swift would call it, where I put on chapstick and explained the history of chapstick, which is actually they used, it's why it has that texture and taste. If you smell it closely, it's got that Vaseline quality to it. Chapstick is... Thank you. I really want to be full-time, and maybe you guys will help me get there. Chapstick is a Vaseline-like product that you rub on your lips to heal scabbing and chapping and dry season and stuff like that. So I've been fighting back a cold, so that's part of the reason why my mouth has been dry, my lips go dry, stuff like that. So anyways, tell us about September 11th. So basically, I've talked about this on the channel before, but I will talk about it now. Basically, the September 11th terrorist attacks were planned by Osama bin Laden, who the United States had originally helped when he was fighting against the Soviets when they invaded Afghanistan. But he was a radical Muslim. He had no affinity for the United States. So in the 1990s, he had already issued a series of terrorist attacks, including one on the World Trade Center already. But in 2001, he organized a series of terrorist attacks using radical Muslim members of his terrorist group, Al-Qaeda, who lived in Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Syria? In Somalia? There were 19 of them, and they hijacked 4 planes. 2 of them, the most notorious, crashed into the 2 towers of the World Trade Center in New York, hitting the American economy. Another one crashed into the Pentagon, hitting the American military. And a third one, and that's 3. The 4th and final one was targeted either at the Capitol building or the White House. And the Americans on the flight re-hijacked the plane and crashed it into a field in Pennsylvania. So, yeah, thank you for bringing that up about Kamala Harris. Somebody mentioned to me the other day that I mispronounced her name. I said Kamala. It's Kamala. And this person went off on me, calling me a racist and a sexist and a misogynist. And I want to hope that they were a troll and not actually that inane. What was Ulysses S. Grant's first job in life? He was a soldier. So Ulysses S. Grant's an interesting guy because he's if you look at his resume, other than being a successful general, nothing about him screams president. He was a soldier in the Mexican-American War, and then he worked in a bunch of different odd jobs, and he couldn't quite hold down a job because he couldn't stop drinking. And he only really did well on the battlefield. So using his experience in the Mexican War, that's how he became a general in the Union Army, and he was the most successful general in the West. And that was what turned the tide of the war, which is what we were talking about at the beginning, how the Civil War. Lincoln puts Grant in charge of the Union Army in the East, and he's able to counter Robert E. Lee, who is the most brilliant general, maybe in American history. Patton, Eisenhower, Washington are all great. Robert E. Lee was amazingly great as a general. The problem was he fought for the Confederacy, and really, so he fought for an enemy of the United States, really. Yeah. So, did I think the U.S. government have anything to do with it? No, I do not. Yeah, that's the thing. So a lot of people said that Osama bin Laden lived in Afghanistan. That was one of the reasons for the U.S. invading Afghanistan, was to retaliate and take out the Taliban, which was supporting Al Qaeda. It turned out he was living in Pakistan. That's where the Obama administration hunted him down and killed him in 2011, 10 years after the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Um, yes, that's very funny. European scramble for Africa. I was talking about that a little bit with Ethiopia and Liberia, but basically in the 1800s, the Europeans are scrambling to try to take over land in Africa to build their empires, and they basically agree to kind of divvy up the land. There's this Congress of Berlin, thanks to Otto von Bismarck in 1885, and Britain gets large swathes of Eastern and Southern Africa. The French get a huge portion of West Africa. Germany, Portugal, Italy, and Spain all take different portions. Russia, the United States, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire are left out because they really have no affinity for doing that. Um, it was $15 million. So basically, Napoleon is trying to destroy the British. So he sells his American lands to the American to he sells his lands to the Americans for 15 million. Interestingly enough, as History Matters, my favorite all-time ever YouTube channel, please subscribe to History Matters. They're fantastic. They did not sponsor this video, by the way, but they point out that basically the British gave the Americans money so that the Americans borrowed from British banks so they could pay for the land from the Louisiana Purchase from Napoleon, who then used that money to fund his wars against Britain. So, tell us about that flag. There's so many flags like that. I don't know which one specifically you mean. Do I think that the UK exiting from the EU was the correct decision? I don't quite know yet. And that's what historians do when it comes to, oh, tell us about Iraq. So the U.S. goes in, so I want to finish with, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little distracted. Apologize. I don't know if it's the correct decision yet or not. It might be. We'll have to see. And historians typically look back on things and see their effects. And really getting the problem the British are having, from what I understand about it, is it's not leaving the EU, it's how they leave the EU. Yes, I do teach history. So basically, the United States had already fought a war with Iraq in the early 1990s to take out Saddam Hussein's influence when he tried to invade Kuwait in the Gulf, Persian Gulf, and take their oil. The United States stopped him with a UN coalition, just like in Korea, and basically he is very much defanged but he's still a brutal, repressive dictator, and he is threatening the United States. He's sponsoring terrorism, and he tells the United States, he brags, I have weapons of mass destruction, and I'm willing to use them. Yeah, we'll see. It could be. And so basically what happens, he sets up, a lot of people think that he has weapons of mass destruction, and that gives the Bush administration the incentive it needs, along with the British and others, to go into Iraq. And the war goes well in replacing Saddam, but the Iraqi insurgents and rebels continue to fight against the U.S., and the U.S. really struggles to set up a successful democracy, just like they did in Vietnam. And basically, it turns out there were no weapons of mass destruction. Either they lied or they misled people, and the war was a big mistake. What is the longest war of the U.S.? Afghanistan, the longest directly. We had been in Vietnam for about 20 years, helping the South Vietnamese and then going in ourselves. And so, but that was a little bit longer, but Afghanistan, direct involvement, 20 years. And it just ended a couple of years ago. Yeah, I've read some books on the Vietnam War, lots about that. I think it was a noble idea. I think it was badly executed. The U.S. could have won that war basically at any time they wished, but they did not want to antagonize. They didn't want to rock the boat too much. And they didn't want to do that in Korea, but they actually got away with Korea by being more aggressive, but they were in many ways, especially when it came to attacking North Vietnam, there was a lot of passivity because of worry about China and Russia. So the Titanic. The idea that it's unsinkable, it's kind of exaggerated, but it's a historical myth to say that they never said it was unsinkable. They did claim it was unsinkable, and they didn't have enough lifeboats, And the government had to regulate it after the sinking of a Titanic when it hit an iceberg. And there were no ships around. The government had to regulate that they had enough lifeboats available. Is religion politics involved in Israel-Palestine? Well, absolutely. You've got religious differences are strong between Jews and Muslims. The problem with the radical Islam in the Middle East today is that radical Muslims are oftentimes fighting each other when they are not fighting Jews or Christians, or Hindus in India, for instance. And so radical Islam is at war with everything, it seems. And at the same time, politically speaking, you have the Palestinian land not independent. They don't have a two-state solution. And you have the people in Gaza really suffering, and partly because of their own government, which is totally committed to terrorist activity, and partly because the Israelis, who are trying to defend themselves, often do that by retaliating very, very harshly. So I've tried to stay clear of giving an actual opinion on that. I've talked about it a lot on the channel, but I think I've been as historically, objectively accurate as possible. There have been many deals on the table, and basically from the history tells us that Israel and the UN agrees to a deal. They bring it to the Palestinians say no, violence occurs, and the Israelis attack the Palestinians. So there's a lot of division there. Yes, I'm glad you brought up the Philippines, and yeah, they did examine him and like that, and he died very, very Abu Ghraib prison was an awful place. Just some of the things that happened in Iraq were really not okay, and Guantanamo Bay. Some batteries for what? I don't need batteries. The French were involved in Vietnam because the French owned Vietnam. They called it Indochina. They had Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. Then in World War II, the Japanese took over, and the Vietnamese freedom fighters were led by a man named Ho Chi Minh. And not only does he get them free from Japan, but he declares them free from France. France goes in and fights a war. They lose, and then the United States goes in there. So the Philippines, taken over by the Spanish, that's why it's called the Philippines. It's named after King Philip II of Spain. And basically is this really, this archipelago, very, very amazing place with a long history. And the Spanish own it for centuries, and they mistreat and oppress the natives. And eventually the U.S. goes in there, partly to help relieve the suffering of the natives, and partly to build their own empire in the Spanish-American War. And most of the fighting is done, in 1898, is naval battles that the U.S. wins, and does very well. And they fight with a man named Emilio Aguinaldo. And Aguinaldo wants independence for his people. And the U.S. says, not too fast, you're not really independent, you're kind of just under new management. And the United States takes over. Aguinaldo fights another revolution, and the Americans, under the leadership of one of their best generals, John Blackjack Pershing, puts down the rebellion, and it takes 15 years. So it's really not until the beginning of World War I that the Philippines is actually firmly controlled by the United States. In World War II, the Philippines are taken by the Japanese, who treat the Filipinos awful. I have a good friend who's Filipino, and he said that there was continual insurgent actions and a resistance. We talk a lot about what the Germans and the Soviets did in oppressing people, but in the Ethio-Italy War, the Italians were particularly awful to the Ethiopians, and the Japanese were horrifyingly cruel to the Chinese and the Filipinos. The Death March of Bataan. And the United States comes back. MacArthur liberates the islands, and then after World War II, as a show of good faith, the United States, pushing democracy around the world, allows the Filipinos to create their own self-government. So the Philippines finally becomes their own independent country in the mid-1940s. Let's see here. What's the oldest religion? From what I have studied, the oldest religion that's currently still extant is Hinduism. Because you can't have India without Hinduism. Judaism would be the oldest monotheistic religion, but Hinduism is, from what I understand and have studied, along with Shintoism, the oldest religions, and Judaism's right there too. Nelson Mandela, obviously an amazing guy, imprisoned for his efforts, the African National Congress, at ending apartheid. So a lot of people don't understand how apartheid worked. Apartheid was not done by the British. The British owned South Africa. And then they left South Africa in the 1960s, and there were two groups of major groups of people left: the South African people, Black Africans, and the Dutch, known as the Boers. And they had actually fought with the British, and the British had kicked them out of had taken over South Africa, just like the Dutch used to own New York City until the British kicked them out of there. But so the Dutch create their own stratified society and government where the Africans, the South Africans, are second-class citizens. It's basically very akin to segregation and discrimination in the United States. And Mandela led the fight against that. He was put in prison for many years. I'm trying to remember what it was. Robin Creek Island, something like that. He was in an island prison for several of those years. He's eventually freed. He wins the Nobel Peace Prize. And when South Africa becomes independent, thanks to his efforts and the efforts of the Dutch president, who was a segregationist, who changed his mind and apologized, Mandela becomes the president. And of course, when he's in prison and later on, he writes Long Walk to Freedom, which is fantastic. I don't know much about Bangladesh. I know that it's part of the British partition to let Bangladesh be its own country. I'm not too familiar about that. People are always bringing up stuff that I haven't read, and new topics for me to learn about, and it's really fascinating. I really love when that happens. What's your favorite ice cream flavor? Mint chocolate chips up there. What is Joe Biden like? Double chocolate chip. I really want to try that now. But I love chocolate peanut butter. It's really good. You have a history channel. Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, that history guy. That's amazing. Thank you so much for coming. If you're still here, that history guy, I hope you didn't get bored and leave. I'm definitely going to subscribe to your channel. I'm so glad you came in. We history people have to support each other. Go and check out that history guy. Subscribe to his channel. Thank you for saying that. I really appreciate you wanting to subscribe because of that. Let me see here. France, Spain, and England were all fighting over dominion over North America, and obviously for the British. I don't know. I don't see the United States being the United States, for better or for worse, without the English influence, the self-government, the parliamentary system. I don't see that in Spain and France, so I don't see if the French win the French-Indian War and take over the 13 colonies, or if the French colonize the capital of the United States, it would be a totally different name, would be in the middle of the country because the French settled the middle, or if the Spanish did it, it'd be in the West, like in California. I don't see that. I don't see America being America. And it depends on your opinion of America and what America has done. Because America's done a lot of good, it's done a lot of bad. But I think that's a fascinating question, and historians love hypotheticals. You subscribe whenever you want. I'm just glad you're here. Support is appreciated. Thank you. Late 20s. I had somebody tell me that I looked 39 the other day, and that really ticked me off. But yes, you are on the right path. I don't like to give out too much personal information like name or things like that, but I try to be very anonymous. People are like, what kind of house is that? And wanted me to give them a tour of the house. Rodolfo always wants me to dance and sing. I don't do that because I can't. Yeah, it did. Oh, that's true. So it became independent in the 70s. Because was it a part of India before then? Interesting. That's fascinating. Thank you for complimenting my vocabulary there. I really appreciate it. That's interesting. In Armenia, you have an area there. I would love it if you started a World War II channel. I'd be your first subscriber. Yes, history is taught differently all over the world, and there's a lot that's not talked about. Something that people don't understand about history is how easily history can get skewed, and we have this notion that history is written by the victors. One of my favorite comedians is Norm Macdonald, and one thing he always said was, I'm going to try my Norm impression. If you know who he is, then hopefully I don't butcher it. But hey, it says here in this history book that the winners have always, that the good guys have always won. Isn't that amazing? Yeah, history is written by the victors. And they win every time, apparently. The good guys always win. And that's obviously not true. But I think there are some agreed facts that we can agree on and say this is true, this definitely happened. And I think that history is taught differently, and some things are twisted, and there's a lot of revisionism. And sometimes people get so much into this. This is what my problem was with the Tucker Carlson, Daryl Cooper interview, that really that interview at the end of the day was Daryl Cooper telling us more about who he is than Daryl Cooper telling us what history is. Because the job of a historian is simple. We tell the truth. Why does Argentina have such high inflation? It's going down a bit now. I mean, we have a global pandemic, and that's caused inflation all over the place. I don't want to give my opinions too much because it might sound too political. But from what I understand, that's a comment. That's actually very historical in some way because a feature of a lot of Central and South American governments is the struggle with finances, is the struggle with keeping up with the rest of the West and kind of being dependent on other countries in the West supplying them with foreign aid and businesses and things like that. I think from what I understand, things are getting better in Argentina. Let me see. It was part of Pakistan. Thank you for, it was part of Pakistan. Okay. Thank you for correcting me. I appreciate that. People correct me on the channel all the time, and I don't get mad about it. I get frustrated sometimes because I'm like, I thought I had that, but never mind. I would really, Eastern Pakistan, I really need to read that. That sounds really good. Yes, history, like anything, can be anything that's truthful. And history, I believe, has a lot of truth in it, can be twisted and manipulated. I don't agree with Napoleon, although I love Napoleon, that history is a fable that we all agree on. Yeah, I doubt the Falcons have anything to do with that. Okay, you make it, and I'll subscribe to it. Comment on one of my videos with your link, and I will put it in my feed, and I will do the same thing with, I'm trying to see, that history guy. I think that was his name. He will definitely get a subscription from me. Yeah, definitely Britain's one of those ones. It's hated a lot by those who colonized because of its colonization and imperialism. Britain has done a lot of terrible, terrible things. Something that I've often thought about Western colonization, I don't think it's a good thing. I think there are some things that were actually beneficial for the people of the regions that were colonized, but that doesn't make it a good thing. One thing I've noticed is that when I study it, the relationships between different groups of human beings often revolve and have horrible things happening to horrible people. Terrible people do terrible things all the time, and good people try to do good things and they mess up. And I think the thing about Britain in particular and a lot of the West, and the West gets a lot of attention for this because they did it more than anyone else. And it's not that they did it because they were more evil, but they did it because they had more access. I think technology really makes a difference. When you get the carracks and you get the frigates and you get the galleys and you get the fast-moving ships of the 1500s, it makes it so much easier to go to Africa, so much easier to go to Central and South America and do atrocities. Because the Europeans were doing atrocities to each other long before that, and they continued to do so to each other long after that. I think technology really makes a big difference there. That technology had not gotten to Africa. For different reasons. There's more reliance on trade and seafaring in Europe than in Africa. The Chinese actually had a fleet called the Treasure Fleet, Zheng He, in the Ming Dynasty that would go around and collect tribute from different islands. And eventually the conservative faction of the government won that said that they needed to stay in China and keep China to itself, and they stopped doing the treasure fleets. So they could have gone around. The Chinese were far more advanced, far more powerful, and far richer than the Europeans. They could have colonized and gotten to Central, South, and North America before the Europeans, but they didn't. And the history would be very different there, indeed. Let's see here. I wish you luck in quitting your addiction. I don't help with addictions directly. So I think that at the end of the day, my point about colonization is that the Europeans aren't worse because of it. They just did it more often because of the technology that allowed them to do it. Sultan Mehmed, which one? Are you talking about the one who destroyed the Byzantines? According to what I have read about what Mao did, the starvation, the famine, the Cultural Revolution, where Mao basically turned on his political party and purged them just like Stalin had, which is common with communists, you're looking between 40 and 80 million people. Which, believe it or not, it's a horrible number. It's just an atrocious number. The worst part about it, I've heard people say, is not that it's so big, it's that you can't fathom it. You can't fathom that. The best description I've ever heard for people describing the unfathomable number died in the Holocaust, 12 million people, is not 12 million, but 1 plus 1 plus 1 until you go all the way down. So, Yes, I would agree with that advice. Yeah, the Opium Wars. There's so much in history that it's not taught. There's a lot that's not talked about, which is why you need people like the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel to guide you, and you need that history guy, and you need No Step on Snake's upcoming World War II History Channel because that's going to help you a lot. Um, there's so much history that we just don't get to in classrooms. I did not know about the war in the Philippines between the U.S. growing up in U.S. school systems. I did not know anything about that until I got to college. And I loved history and I was fascinated by it. I always thought it was just a blanket easy case. The U.S. were the good guys, but it's more shady than that. Um, who's the word? I love that question. I'm going to answer that question. Usually I only go an hour. I'm at an hour, 75 minutes, and I'm feeling good. So I'm just kind of holding on. You're currently training to be a Marine. Good luck with that. I hope you get in there. They could definitely use somebody who is as intelligent and bright as you are. But basically, the Opium Wars are how Britain is shipping illegally opium into China. The Chinese say, stop doing this. We're already trading enough with you. By the way, the idea that the British love tea and invented tea is absolute nonsense. It is a very British thing, but it's because they took it from China and they traded with from China and they got the spices from India. So tea time in Britain, all these things came from other places. The potato, we think of Irish, we think of potato. The potato is from South America, but it's more easy to grow in Ireland. And the British actually starved and killed the Irish to hold on to the potatoes or let them die during the Irish potato famine. That's why a lot of Irish came to the United States in the 1840s and 50s. But anyways, I digress. So the Opium Wars, they're funneling opium in. The Chinese try to stop them, the Qing dynasty, and they won't. And they have two wars, and the British win both. And I think it's after the second one they take over Hong Kong, and China is kind of under the British sphere of influence, although not directly controlled. And a bunch of Europeans actually kind of go into China and divide up different trade, have different regions that they trade in. The Russians, the British, the French, even the U.S. Then the Chinese get ticked at that, try to fight them off in what's called the Boxer Rebellion. They lose, and eventually the Europeans, the Americans, and the Japanese decide to trade evenly with the Chinese in the early 1900s. Um, History in school is also manipulated. Yep. Coffee's becoming more popular. That's really good to hear. Yeah. And tea is popular here in the United States. I drink tea all the time. Do a backflip. When you're sitting in a chair, it could be pretty dangerous. So I'm good. I'm not going to do that. Sorry about that. Let's see. Yeah, I love how you put that number. Well, it's not that they don't. I wouldn't even say that they don't hide that they hide history. It's that they don't know it themselves. It's that a lot of people who teach social studies aren't as passionate about it as they should be. I just hope I'm as passionate about it as I should be. Maybe I'm too passionate. See, your interest. See, people who really love history. Someone was trying to call me. That's why I had that happen. People get into history because of their own personal curiosity, not because of their teachers and hopefully good YouTube channels at the very least can rectify that. So sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties here. Um, who do I think was worse, the Japanese or the Nazis? I think the Nazis are worse. I think the Holocaust obviously is really bad, but I think one should not underlook things like Unit 731, where the Japanese literally experimented on the Chinese, all sorts of crazy Frankenstein-like experiments on Chinese prisoners of wars. They shouldn't underlook the brutality of the Japanese POW camps. Um, I'm sorry, you can't see me. Can you hear me? Don't know why I'm freezing. Oh, geez, I'm sorry, guys. Let's see. We were having such a good talk. Come on, come on, come on. Why is this? Is my image back? All right. If you can hear me, I hope you can at least hear me. Okay. So hopefully the feed's back in a second. I apologize. So I really appreciate you saying that about me being better than your other teachers. I am actually a history teacher by trade. So, what was I gonna say? Um, I like what you were in those questions. We were talking about Japanese are the Nazis. So the Nazis are definitely worse. You've got the Holocaust. I don't think you can top the Holocaust in terms of brutality. Somebody asked who was the worst dictator. I think Stalin and Mao duke it out with Hitler in a close third. That's how I would tier list it. And somebody has asked me to tier list it. Although the most brutal dictator proportionally, when it comes to murdering his own people and population percentages, is Pol Pot of the Khmer Rouge. So let's see. Any luck? How could only Hiroshima? That's kind of what Tucker Carlson is doing when he's only looking at what Churchill did with Dresden. When he's only looking at what Churchill did with Dresden, you don't see you when you do that, you diminish the crimes of the other side. And that, but a few more questions that I really want to get to. I don't have any be a Marine. I'm not. I've never been in the military. I have such respect. Semper Fidelis, though. Yeah. Sorry about the buffering. Sorry about the I hope Taylor and like and subscribe. If you're enjoying what you're doing, be sure to do that. That's my opinion, who is the worst dictator. That's interesting. There's a lot of Americans who have tea, and a lot of Americans who really enjoy it. Afghan opium to China. A lot to influence other people. And they're actually trying to take over Afghanistan at the same time they're trying to influence India, and they kind of do, but they just can't hold on to Afghanistan. Okay. I'm sorry. Can you guys hear me? Am I coming in? Okay, let's see here. Let me try this. Wi-Fi off, Wi-Fi back on. Hopefully that fixes. Okay, Wi-Fi. Okay, can anyone hear me? Okay, I think we're back. I think we're back. Yeah, kind of lasts that long. I'm not sure about that. Pizarro conquers the Incas. Something that I did hear recently and read is that the Incas who were conquered by Pizarro were actually only there for about a century. So the idea that these long-standing empires like the Aztecs and Incas were there for a long time and then all of a sudden fell apart because the Spanish arrived, it's not true. They were a bunch of different civilizations in Central and South America, to be sure, with proud histories. And the Spanish didn't just show up and take over them. A lot of people have this misconception that the Europeans had such good technology that the the Indians were always at their feet. That's not true. It was it was actually the other way around. Cortez rallied the Indian tribes that were being oppressed by the Aztecs and used them to overthrow the Aztecs, and then he enslaved them. Pizarro likewise used a civil war between the Incan Emperor Atahualpa and his brother Huascar to create the conditions for conquering the Incas. He was actually Cortez's cousin, interestingly enough. Okay, so let's see. I am so sorry for all the technical difficulties. I guess that's what happens when you go for 80 minutes. This is my longest one. I think I've answered everything. Yeah, and history is taught different in every corner of the world, but I would love for unification in the way we teach history. I wouldn't want to mandate that by law, but just find standardized things, find things we can agree on, and a consensus. I mean, that's enough of me on my soapbox, though. Let me see anything I'm missing with historical stuff. Yeah, let me see here. I really appreciate all the compliments. Philippines wore Kia 3000 US. Yes, there was a lot of that in the Philippines. It's a war we don't talk about, the Philippine War for Independence. Oh, that's the one question that I saw that I'd love to answer from Ed. Do you think current political trends are influencing the teaching of history? Yes, I do. I think that people are looking at, I think that the thing that we're seeing with politics, and it's happening, it just seems to be happening everywhere. The United States is just the strongest example because it's the most people focus on it the most. Thank you. I really want to get there. So hopefully with your guys' help, we will get there. But I think that everything, because of politics, is so divided and the culture is so divided that, like in America and other places too, everything is political, and that means history too. So you're going to the Philippines in a few weeks. Oh, that's awesome. Take me with you. Not just kidding. I'm kind of a stranger. But tune into the live stream and let me know what time it is there, because I would love to know what time it is in the Philippines. I'd love to know the time difference. It's an amazing place, and I'd love to go there someday. So let me see here. So yes, history is definitely being influenced very heavily by politics, and it's a sad reality, but it's where we are. And my job and the job of the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel and of No Steps job and That History Guy's job, their job is to give you the facts. History is easy. We tell the truth. If you love history, like and subscribe. I really appreciate you coming. And it's actually good that we stayed on longer because it's allowed other people to come in and ask them stuff. We're only supposed to be an hour. I'm going to wrap up in just a couple of minutes. Thank you for staying as long. I want to be sensitive to your time. I'm going to answer. I had one more question here I want to answer, and then we're going to wrap it up. Again, like and subscribe at 5:27 a.m. So that's interesting. So that's like 12 hours ahead of the like East Coast. Got it. Okay, I don't know what that means, but thank you. So yeah, what was I going to say? So why is Napoleon's campaign against Russia swept under the rug when he lost over 300,000 soldiers? I don't think it's swept under the rug. The humiliation of the Grande Armée is one of the biggest atrocities and one of the biggest blunders by one of the best commanders, if not the best commander in human history. And it's all right. It's too hot. I was sweating bullets yesterday when we started. But basically, Napoleon really screws up by invading Russia. It's one of his most catastrophic decisions, and he fights them well, but the Russians kind of do guerrilla war. They scorch earth, they burn land, they won't show up. Then they show up at the Battle of Borodino. Napoleon barely wins that. I just did a video on this yesterday. Most of my videos are shorts, by the way, but then he goes to Moscow, and instead of giving him Moscow, which is the cultural capital of Russia, St. Petersburg is the actual capital at the time, so that's a common historical myth, that the Russian Weather. It's actually the tactics of the Russians using the weather against it's a kind of a waiting out approach, really just kind of making Napoleon stretch out his supply lines. Same thing with the Nazis, letting Hitler get too confident and beating them. The historical myth also, paradoxically, is that it was a bad idea for Napoleon to invade Russia and for Hitler to do the same. No, they both looked like a slam dunk on a plate. But the Russians were able to just make it a war of attrition and outlast them, at least in my opinion. So it isn't swept under the rug. It's talked about a lot. They set fire to Moscow. Napoleon's stunned that this happens, and he retreats. And that's when the Tsar, Alexander I, mobilizes the Russian army to go after Napoleon. And there's these guerrilla skirmishes, and Napoleon's just decimated in the winter. So it's not that whoever defeats the Germans or the French, it's that the Russians use the weather to their advantage to defeat their enemies, and that's what makes them almost an unbeatable country in many ways when it comes to offensive wars. You were studying Russian, so you missed me. Ironic, you come in when I'm talking about Russian. I'm glad to have you here. The weather is definitely a huge part of it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it doesn't play a part. I'm saying the Russians know how to use their weather against their enemy. And Napoleon does fight well. And on paper, like I just said, on paper, it's a slam dunk. It makes total sense that this war would really, really work well and that he can really bring Russia under his thumb, just like he's done the Prussians and the Austrians. Yeah, it just happens that way with generals. There's a lot of mistakes. I mean, Caesar doesn't win that many battles. Alexander wins a lot in a short amount of time. Napoleon is probably the most successful, but one of the things I love about Napoleon is that he also it's not like a clean idealism. He has a lot of mistakes, but he has a lot of brilliant moments. No, I'm not going to come tomorrow. It's Sunday. I've got work tomorrow, so I don't do these on the weekdays, but I am going to but after 2 weeks of doing it twice on the weekends, I'm going to keep it up. So for the next live stream, Leipzig is a great one. I love Austerlitz, because who doesn't love Austerlitz? He gives up the high ground, then makes everybody think that he's in total chaos and destroying his own equipment. Then he surprises those fools. Napoleon's incredible. I have a long length video on Napoleon on the channel. It's one of my favorite videos that I ever got to make. I've made several short videos about him. There's just so much about the guy that I find so fascinating. Go ahead and watch that longer video. It's like 7 or 8 minutes long. I need to find an editing software. I use CapCut. You might see that if you see the very end of my video sometimes. I use CapCut because you can record, and people use this for TikTok a lot. I can record. I'm also thinking of doing the rumbling thing. You can record, you can fit photos up, and you can put in text captions. Thank you. I really appreciate you watching the shorts. Tell all your friends and family. We're going to wrap it up at this point. yeah, I'm glad you guys are studying Russian and following the channel. And if you really like learning about Napoleon and everything else about history, because we talked about a lot today, I started off with the Civil War, and now we're at 90 minutes. Uh, please be sure to like, subscribe, tune into the channel. The next live stream will be next Saturday at 6 p.m. Eastern, followed up by its counterpart Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern, right here with me on the Friendly Neighborhood channel. What did you think of the Napoleon movie? Oh my God. I thank you. I really appreciate that. Give me the handle on one of my videos, and we are good to go. Hala Montezuma, I think that's in Mexico City, which is where Tenochtitlan, they built it over Tenochtitlan. And I will see Hacksaw Ridge. I'm going to sit down, glass of wine, some nice food, and watch it because I know it's an impressive movie. Mel Gibson directed it, if I'm correct. What did you think of the Napoleon movie? I haven't seen it, and I really want to see it, and I need to see it too. And I like Ridley Scott, and I like Joaquin Phoenix. I can't wait to see the Joker's movies. So I really appreciate it. All right. Take care, and thank you for all the support and all the great questions and your loyalty. It really helps the channel grow. Like and subscribe. Check out those longer videos. I just had one drop that I reloaded of Augustus, and obviously you have the shorts, the day in history, and all that stuff. Please be on the watch for my 2 final longer length Roman Empire videos, and I will see you guys. Boston Tea Party. They throw it in the harbor not because they don't want to drink it, because they don't want to be taxed for it, because they're not taxed without representation. That's the last thing I'm going to say. Take care and have a great week. See you next Saturday. Bye-bye, everyone.